Hello everyone, I'm super excited to bring you Bea Staley. She's here on the Science of Reading bus with us today. Hi Bea.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm really well. Why don't you tell all of our bus drivers about who you are and what you do?
Well, I am actually a pediatric speech therapist by training. So I've spent 20 years working in hospitals and schools, and really working with adults who work with children to support language and literacy development. But now I am a senior lecturer at Darwin University. So I work in inclusive education, and I spend a lot of time thinking about early literacy.
Yeah, fantastic. So at the moment, we are exploring the concept of early oral language in the classroom. And so what does it mean to you for someone to create a language-rich classroom? What does that look like?
Well, I think there are lots of ways you can create a language-rich classroom. But for me, when I go into a classroom that I think of as a language-rich classroom, what I see happening is there's lots of interesting talk. There's lots of interesting materials that support that interesting talk, that support vocabulary, that support thinking, that support inquiry. And I hear adults and modeling the kinds of talk that they want their children using in the classroom. Yeah. So, in order to have that happen, there's an expectation that children's bodies are where they're supposed to be. So usually those teachers have sorted out their routines and sorted out their way that they redirect, and they're using language as an opportunity for learning. Yeah. And this sounds so obvious, but I think it's the thing that a lot of teachers struggle with the most.
Awesome. So what are your top 3 things? If a teacher says, right, this is the time I want to make my classroom more rich in oral language, what are the 3 things you would recommend they focus on?
So if you're really doing good quality talk, it's actually tiring. So I think the first thing I would recommend is think about the time when you want to work on it. So you're not going to work on it overall the whole day. If it comes easily, sure. I would say, I want to really make this time of talk a rich oral language opportunity, and I'd focus on that time. And then I would look at myself and see what I'm doing anyway. Do I ask interesting questions? Mm-hmm. Do I ask too many questions and I don't wait for the answers? This is very, very common. Asking a question, or do I ask questions and I have a specific answer in my mind? And if I don't get that answer, I just spend the whole time making the kids guess what's in my head. Mm-hmm. That's another very typical thing that happens. So noticing your own talk, like when a child's not doing what you'd like them to be doing, what do you say and how do you negotiate that? When kids bring you really rich stories, what do? Do you tell them to be quiet and you keep going on with your planned program? Or do you spend time developing that opportunity? Even noticing things like, who are the talkers in your class? Who are the kids that you respond to a lot because maybe their cultural talk matches yours and they say the right things, versus the kids that don't get a lot of opportunities. So I think if you've got a second adult, or you can record yourself if you've got one of those cameras, watching how you interact with children can be quite interesting, and then that can be the place you say, oh, I notice I do well.
Yeah, and I think that's really hard because we want to respond to children in the moment, but we all feel so much pressure to get all of the things in because there seems to be so much to do. But it sounds like what you're describing is if we can tap into the richness of children's interests and the richness of their take on things, that we can build a much deeper conversation with them and between other children as well.
Yeah, and I think words are so exciting. And, sometimes you'll give little kids big words and then they'll use them because they're just like, whoa. But if you're not excited about the words, then they might not know to be excited about the words. So really spending time, oh, hey, that's a new word I don't think we've talked about before. What does that mean? And what are other things that mean the same thing?
It's that active connection building, isn't it, for them?
With words.
So they tune in, and we're modeling the attitude to language as well as the words themselves.
Yes. So one of my friends has a preschooler, and his teacher has this, I think, genius idea. The show and tell has a letter for the week, and they have to bring something that goes with the letter. But every night at the dinner table in her house, what's happening is she'll be like, well, what did Miriam's family send in for Jay? And she's like, well, I know which parents send in kind of interesting stuff. So spend all week working out what Hugo is going to send in for Jay. So sometimes he'll just come in jumping. That's his show and tell.
Yeah.
But what was interesting in the story is how it's got families engaged with show and tell, beyond bringing in, that like Disney junk that, causes fights in lunchtime. And, people are bringing in more interesting things and, expected to look around their environment.
What a marvelous way to involve families in building those phonological skills, identifying that first phoneme, and then we're having conversations about, well, what things will start with j in our house, and the things that we do. So I think that's a terrific idea. So much for teachers to take away from this conversation. Bea, thank you for being here. When you work with teachers and you're leading an oral language project at the moment, is my understanding. So when you're leading that and working with schools, what do you see is one of the huge obstacles? Where do teachers get stuck in their understanding and in their development of practice around building oral language?
I'm not sure that we spend enough time talking about oral language. It's kind of like the sea, the water that we swim in. So, you're always talking about the seaweed or the rocks or the fish, but we're never really talking about that environment. And so, in my younger days, I spent a lot of time on a research project where I would watch teachers. They were videoing themselves and I was watching them and like coding their talk. So I had a lot of time to think about this. I think for most people, though, they don't really pay too much attention to their talk. And adults say all sorts of things. And often I want to say, hey, listen to what you just said. Listen to the messaging you're giving. And often we expect kids to know what we're thinking. We really do spend a lot of time having them guess what we're thinking rather than just telling them the things, telling them what they need to do, and supporting that with pictures, supporting it any way we can. It's like, well, if I'm giving them the answers, then they're not learning. But that doesn't make sense. We need to give them the answers.
Yeah, and particularly, you working so heavily in inclusive education, our students with additional needs can have so much easier time in the classroom if we use more visuals, if we're more explicit about what we mean, and we don't assume that when we say it's time to sit on the mat and listen now, that they know what that means. And so this goes with the instruction as well. So what's your piece of advice, I guess, your sage words of wisdom to help teachers overcome that if they are doing a little bit too much of the guess what's in my head?
I think really just reflect on your stuff. Go to that place. You might noticing, are you a teacher that spends a lot of time talking about feelings, but never talks about content? Kind of have one of those that we've been working with. Are you a teacher that gets really bogged down in the details sometimes? Or do you do a good job managing like for me, if I got 80% of the kids with me, I just keep going. I don't worry about those 20%. They'll come back in their good time. They might be listening. But then there are other teachers that, like, if a foot's out of place, they don't keep going. So you get very disjointed learning for the kids that are sitting where they're supposed to be sitting. So I think really just reflecting on your own style and your own talk is going to set you up for being like, okay, here's something I think that I could probably work on. If you can't figure it out, you know, if you've got another adult in the room or another teacher that you trust, say, you know, what have you noticed about my teaching that maybe, you know, some people just go too fast. If they just slow down a little bit, that would help.
So it sounds like the action that our teachers can take away from watching this interview is actually record yourself, as uncomfortable as that makes us, but record yourself and watch it back and do a little bit of an audit. And I think what I might do to support our teachers who are watching here is make a checklist so that can guide people around when they're reflecting or watching recordings, or in fact, if they have that opportunity to have someone come and observe them, a teaching colleague or their assistant or whoever, to work through and be able to give some really useful feedback about how to make the language and the talk more accessible for the students. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Bea, I want to thank you for your time today as our first on the bus presenter. Thank you so much. Now, you also have developed a speech sound manual for teachers. And so can you just in 1 minute just tell us a little bit about that? And we'll,
no worries.
In the post so everyone can find the manual. It's free.
Yeah, so feel free to use it. I think the bit that teachers find the most useful is we have some cards. Hang on, I might have one in my drawer here that you can see. So if we're working on sounds, when I'm working on the letter, I'm not just working on the letter name, I'm working on the letter sound, and we talk about how that's produced. And on the back of the card, it tells you as a teacher.
So the focus of this is more oral rather than a phonic space. It's really about that.
Totally about oral. So when I do P, I would usually also do B at the same time. Yep. So because P, P, P and B, B, B are the same, one's voice on, one's voice off. So we really focus on that speech sound piece. It's about oral language. It's about listening, not so much reading. And certainly, there are some video links that I can share where I just model how I introduce the sounds to kids.
Oh, that would be marvelous. So I'll pop those links in the post that accompanies this video as well, so that people can find all of those resources nice and easily. Well, Bea, thank you so much again. I will be calling on you, I think, at a later date, because we need to have more conversations. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.